Hi, look, I've decided to do a project on teacher induction. So looking at actually how to train new staff coming to our school and make sure that there's a good transfer of the ideas of what the information needs to be. My name's Michelle Bradley and I'm currently Faculty Head of ICT at Launceston Church Grammar School. I have a couple of different roles there. I teach 7 to 12 ICT, which is a really broad range of things it can do. I also help staff on an as-needed basis, helping them with what's needed for different areas of their work, whether that be in the business studies, business office, or the administrative offices or whatever. We're also looking at doing hybrid learning and online learning more starting next year at Grammar, and there's just a way that we can actually start looking at that. A lot of my way of doing things is already online, but I'm trying to actually find a way to make sure that, not just that I'm giving it, but I'll make sure that there's an understanding of that information. And that's where I'm focusing. So it's less about giving information in an online method, but how to actually make sure that that information is understood, not just seen. At the beginning of every year we have a lot of, well, not saying a lot, but we have a number of staff members that change over, and some of those staff members are actually hired in December of the previous year. So what we do is we have situations where in the start of the school year we have a professional development day, and those staff are required to sit down for a huge number of meetings, and from the discussions I've had with those staff members, they've said that the information, they tick a box to say yes, they've understood it, and they probably have, but whether they've taken it all in on a long-term basis is another thing. One of the things when I arrived at the school, I was given a 150-page document, said, here you go, find this. And I did find that there were vital pieces of information that I didn't actually take on, and that I really needed to be known as a first instance. That's not the way it's done now, but I still think there's room to grow. What it would mean, I suppose, is that if staff were actually hired earlier, so in December, which was the case last year, there were about 4 staff members that already knew they had a job in December. If we were doing this in an e-learning method, you could actually have it in a situation where a staff member could do this training before school even started, and then instead of doing these meetings, and we're talking about something like 5 3-hour meetings was what our Dean of Staff was saying, instead of doing that, actually talking about how to actually transfer that to something that could be done before they even get to school, and then hit the ground running on other tasks before they do that. I've just popped in a few different options there. My main key for this is going to be talking about understanding. So rather than knowledge of things to regurgitate, you can actually take that information and you can transfer it to other situations. And the other aspect I'm going to look at is the idea of synchronous and asynchronous discussion. So synchronous discussion taking place in real time, so things like instant messaging. Asynchronous discussion is more in real time, so things like email. And I'm going to talk about how that would be useful within responding to this task. The other situation that I'll talk about is transfer goals. So I want to talk about in this specific situation about what's actually going to define what a student is only going to be able to do independently at the end of a task. Now that's something we're looking at Grammar a lot, but what I'm looking at specifically in this case is the teacher or the staff member as the student, and are they going to be able to independently control what they're doing and talk about information effectively after the task. I've already talked about a couple of these things, but the reason that I think this is so important, it can be done in their own time, it can be done ahead of time. The time in professional development, we have a whole week for PD, surely that could be used more effectively, and that's where I'm trying to sort of come in, that they could actually be working with staff members on development of units, understanding different ways that we teach and so on. It would also mean that there was a record kept of information based on, so for example, if it was an occupational health and safety situation, it would be given, you know, if something happened, heaven forbid, and a child said, or a staff member said, look, I didn't get that information, then we would actually have a record of the fact that they had been given it, that they'd completed tasks and they had given the correct answer, and then we would be covered from that situation. But also it would mean that the information could be looked at again if they had an issue that they couldn't remember it. They could go back and look at it, and also we'd have a higher level of transfer in the sense that they would have a long-term understanding rather than a short-term regurgitation of facts. The other thing that I'm looking at, because we're looking at these online situations, I think that it could really be a prototype for how we would do a lot of our training, both for staff and for students around the school. Mostly the audience is going to be new staff members. I am going to ask, as part of my second assessment, I'm actually going to get some of the newer teachers, and we've got a few that have started in the last 6 to 8 weeks that have gone through this process, that I'm actually going to ask some of those staff members to do a compare and contrast of the different methods and just talk about the pros and cons of both. There's also going to be a range of abilities, and not necessarily, I don't mean ability as such, but I mean ranging from experience from student teacher through to, you know, 20, 30 year experience of teacher. So if you were able to do it in a faster way, that would be something that would be useful to you. Okay, it might take you 5 minutes, might take you 15 minutes, whatever it takes, as long as you can show that learning, then that would be a useful thing. And it would allow the student or the learner to go through at their own pace. By using this technology, as I've discussed, speed's going to be increased. The amount of information that's gets across and remembered long term is going to be useful. They're also going to be able to revisit it. The school will be covered, as I've said before, and they'll be able to fast track any information that they need to cover. I'm going to do a series of surveys and trying to get the selection of the information as deep as I can, given the number of staff that we talk about. So I will use a combination of new and old staff and ask them to go through and look at this information and give me sort of a before and after of the information transfer and see how that goes. I'm going to create some model videos and surveys, and I'm going to ask a smaller number of the staff to complete the tasks, and results will be marked and collated. And then I'll also at a later date get some information, check some information transfer based on the information that they'd seen, and whether they can do that again at a later date without actually having to look at the videos. There are a lot of different ways that this could be done. I mean, it could be SurveyMonkey to create surveys to get this information. You could create a database. There are a lot of different options you could do, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, but this is the decision about what I've made that I'm going to do. We, as a school, have decided to use Yammer as a communication community, and as a result I just thought that would be a really good way to set things up for us. Yammer is basically like Facebook for business and education, and it allows you to go through, share videos, share resources, comment on others' work and so on, And I thought that a really ideal way to do this, as you can see down the bottom of the screen here, is to actually set up a private group, which is a teacher induction group, and put a series of videos and surveys onto there. Once again, because school has already invested in this and it just will fit with what we've got to do, I'm going to use Office 365 to use surveys and actually have those surveys and link them into, so that directly underneath the video would actually be a survey, and they can do that straight away, and that would go into an online saving. I've also put a little bit of a link here so you can actually go and have a look if you like. It's just the way to do it. It's very quick and easy. The other thing that I'm going to do is record it on Camtasia. That's the link for Camtasia Recorder, but for Studio. But I am actually going to do it as Camtasia Recorder, and basically that's what I'm using now to record this. So you can do screen capture, and it gives you the information that you need to do it. Very simple and easy. Any recorder could be used, though it really doesn't make any difference. So there's a lot of different options, but mine are mostly based on cost and products we've already had, and also the ability to use it outside school. So in other words, if the person isn't physically at school, as long as they've got a school email address, they can complete it. So basically I've just justified that there, that while you could use a lot of different options, money is one issue, usability is another. I would have loved to do an Access database, but I don't quite have the skills to be able to transfer that across and do that as a different method. So what I thought, that these things are going to work effectively. All that this person needs to be given is their staff ID and a username and password for email, and that's it. By creating this project, I think that what's going to happen is that the school's requirements are going to be much clearer, and admittedly at the moment we're just doing that for teacher induction, but I think eventually when we're talking about, we're trying to get a bit of a broader program on how staff could actually do flipped lessons and understanding by design, and that's a school focus. By doing that we could do training to allow staff to be able to do that as well. Senior staff will be able to keep track of the completion of any tasks that are done. We'll be able to keep a stronger idea of whether the knowledge has been transferred and the long-term retention of that knowledge. Time's going to be much more effectively and efficiently used, and that's a really big thing. When teachers have such a minimal amount of time, you want to use it in the best way possible. By simplifying it, one of the things that I think will be handy, as well as having the idea of having videos and having surveys, it will also mean that if key staff members are part of that group, not necessarily senior staff, but staff that are able to help with this, what will happen is that staff, if any of the new staff have issues, they can put up an option, type and talk about it, and anyone within the group can respond, whether it be a new staff member or an old staff member. Tasks can be made much simpler, and also time taken to complete the task will be smaller, and a lot more tracking is going to be able to, and over time we will start to get a bit of an idea about the information and how that is transferred to staff, and I think that's going to be really effective. The learning outcomes for this is that staff will be able to understand the basic administrative tasks required of them, so things like doing roll call, how often do we need to do that, how do you do reporting, how do you, if a student leaves your class early, what do you do when that situation comes up. How do you do an evacuation drill? All of those sorts of things will be covered. Be able to transfer that learning to new and unique situations, and that's an example of the transfer goal that I'm really wanting to get to come up. And that's probably my biggest focus in that, because I think that a lot of these things can be passed in lots of different ways, but the idea of long-term transfer is really where I want to focus. In assignment 2, I'm going to be looking at it from a bit of a two-pronged effect. I want to look at the theories behind knowledge transfer, the best ways to do that. So that's one focus of it. But then the other aspect is that I want to actually analyse some data. And I'm aware that sometimes, you know, depending on the volume of data and the sample size that I take, that's going to be limited. But I do want to be able to focus a little bit on that. And look at testing that transfer based on the theoretical aspects that I'll discuss, and actually get staff to look at understanding that information, doing surveys to complete, then maybe doing some other surveys that will allow me to see what their approach and what changes they'd like to make to the tasks and the surveys and so on, and see whether they like doing it in the method. The short, I've already done just a very, very small, just asked a few people about it, and already the feedback's been quite positive. One comment from a staff member was that while they had said that they had ticked it off and that they understood it all, they basically did that because it would have meant sitting there longer. And that pretty much sums it up all for me. Okay, and there's some resources. Thank you for listening.